How's everyone doing? I'm Anisha. I'm a 14-year-old quantum computing developer. I'm also one of the founders at an organization called Community. And what we do is we spread quantum computing education to high schoolers like me. So before coronavirus started, we actually were on track to host a hackathon with NYU and IBM in New York City just to educate a lot of high schoolers like me about quantum computing. I'm also a student in the Knowledge Society, or TKS, which we've been talking about. And the TKS, for those of you who don't know, is a human growth accelerator. So what they do is they teach us to think like people like Elon Musk, like CEOs and global leaders. They teach us those mindsets. And they also teach us how to use emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, and like me, I use quantum computing. And I meet a lot of other people who have the same mindsets as me and think just like I do. And we made a lot of friends and a lot of connections. So today I'm here interviewing Naveen. Naveen is the co-founder of Foursquare. He's an entrepreneur and an angel investor. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to meet everybody virtually, I guess.
How's your quarantine?
It's been pretty good. We have a 15-month-old at home, and so that probably makes it hard. But everything else, yeah, we're all healthy. We're luckier than most people in the world. We're happy. Our family's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to kick this interview off with something really simple. So you have an undergraduate and a master's degree in computer science. What made you want to take that path?
Um, so I actually moved to this country when I actually moved to the US when I was from India when I was 11 years old, and my dad had gotten a master's. My mom, I think, was on the way to getting a master's, and then she had kids, and so she just decided to stay at home, be a stay-at-home mom in India. And I think I knew going into college, which I did here at Worcester Polytechnic in Massachusetts, that I wanted to study computer science because I just liked coding and engineering, and I knew I was going to pick something in engineering. And it was actually my mom, actually both my parents, who said I couldn't leave school until I actually figured out and completed some level of master's education, because both being immigrants, but also because of how their own education was shaped, I think they thought, okay, you have to get as far as you can, and at minimum, that is a master's in order to get a good job, in order to get a high-paying job, and you can be a leader if you get that as opposed to a bachelor's. Like, this is the way I think their mind was working. So if anything, I wanted to get out of school as fast as I could so I could start working and making stuff. But they made me kind of slow down and also do the master's. And I
So
actually ended up somewhere in the middle because I actually did both a bachelor's and a master's in 4 years. So as opposed to 6 years, I didn't really have a social life. I went to school during the summer. I worked my way through school, and I was like, I got to get out of here, but they want me to do this. So I decided, okay, fine, let's meet in the middle. I'll just pack everything in 4 years and get it done.
So what kept you motivated the entire time that you were in masters, considering it was not a degree that you like really wanted all that much for yourself? What kept you motivated? Like what were you looking forward to?
I think there were certain parts of the master's curriculum which I really did enjoy. I think even before I got to the bachelor's program, I knew I had an interest in coding. I'd already kind of tried to build stuff on my own, um, mostly things that friends had used. I tried to kind of solve my own crude problems back in the day in the late 90s, I guess, early 2000s. And so I think the master's program to me was it was interesting to go into certain subjects, and I didn't enjoy all of them because I feel like in some of those cases, like it's heavy duty math, or it's like you're taking it so that you can take other courses. And I knew I didn't want to go after a PhD or like go into the teaching path. So I think for me, I tried to enjoy as much as I could, um, while at the same time picking and choosing courses in the master's level that I thought could be helpful later. So for instance, like instead of going hardcore math, which would have been great, I think I'd have been good at that too. I thought a better way to, find subjects that are more applicable was maybe to like study distributed systems at the time. So this is like early 2000s, right? This is like 2001, 2002. And so that's the path that I took. And ultimately that did end up being interesting and, ended up becoming a thing that I think I ended up using sort of some of that knowledge and those frameworks in my work life after leaving school. But yeah, I didn't enjoy all of it because I feel like the master's thing is you go into it because you want to get a master's and teach, or you get a master's and you get a job that requires it, or you get a master's and you get a PhD. and that definitely was not my path. So I had to kind of glue these pieces together in ways that I thought would be most useful.
Do you still think that that degree was necessary for you, or was that something that you think you could have still achieved the same amount of success without?
Um, Specifically the masters or just the computer science?
Yeah, either. Just
I think computer science is one of those things. I think in the late '90s to 2000s, and the kind of era that we're living in, like everything is about software, using software to solve problems in various domains. So I don't think you needed to go to school to apply software to all sorts of problems, small business problems, COVID possibly, um, you know, math problems like the Wolframs of the world. I think it's a unique industry driven mostly by computer science where you don't need to do that. Had I studied something else like aerospace and I'm like, I really love helicopters and I want to make helicopters, I definitely would have had to go to masters, right? There's a different path. There's only so much you can learn, I guess, in helicopter design, let's say, as opposed to computer science on your own. And so for me, I don't think I needed it, but I think some of the things that it taught me, to slow down, to think deeply about certain areas, some of the friends and connections that I made have obviously led to where I am now, right? I don't think you can just remove that one Jenga piece and expect to be where I am now. My life would be kind of different. Even
yeah.
slightly, it would be different. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that your dad was an engineer. How did that affect you growing up?
Um, yeah. So my dad actually studied mechanical engineering, but he's kind of like a jack of all trades engineer. So he's actually over the years done hardcore mechanical stuff, taught himself, car and motorcycle design and tried to fix those up on his own. He's taught himself to code. He actually used this mechanical engineering degree, then later on went to go get a maritime engineering degree, a master's, and he ended up working on cargo ships, on merchant marine. And so he did that for 15 years. So he's done electrical engineering on his own, like self-taught. And so if anything, I think that kind of proved to me like the importance of math and the importance of engineering. And it also led to this kind of, you can kind of take anything apart and put it back together, because almost all engineering problems, except the very difficult ones, which we're still trying to figure out, figure out the answers to, like you can put it together, you can get to a solution, right? And even something like medicine isn't always like that, because it's like you have a certain diagnosis and the doctor is like, we've tried everything, that's it, let's just let it play out. That's sometimes the best you can do. But in engineering, you can kind of fix everything. There's like no screw left undone, right? And I think um, that's part of the reason I was attracted to it as well. I can take things apart and put things together. I can take an idea or design that doesn't exist and I can put it together on my own and make something. I remember when my dad, growing up in, I guess he was born in the 50s, so 50s, 60s, India, 50s, 60s, 70s, like China and India were, and I guess still are, they were definitely rivals. And I remember my dad telling me a story, like when he was very young, he just put together his own radio. He's like, radios are expensive to buy. I really like engineering and electrical stuff. I want to get into it. So I'm just going to go buy cheap parts and or find parts and put together a radio so I can share about the war and the conflict between the two countries. And so I thought, like, that's kind of interesting, right? He's a teenage kid and he's been telling this story his whole life, stories like this. And he's like, he just put together a radio on his own. You can't really do that in many other fields except engineering. So engineering meaning like, the mechanicals, the electrical, the computer science, like those are things where you could just go to a Radio Shack or, go find some documents online and some programming languages and just kind of think of something and then put it together on your own. So I think that's my biggest takeaway is like more than anything else I could have studied, engineering is something that is a closed loop and is something that you just draw it on a piece of paper and the next thing you know, you're actually building it to completion. So it's no surprise I think I went down that path too.
Yeah. Your dad seems like a really creative person. I know he also spent 15 years sailing around the world.
Yeah.
Tell me about
He
that.
so there's a really great, and I didn't know this until many years later, there's a really great book, and actually I think it's Bill Gates like top 20 books that he loves of all time or something like that, or top 100. It was on his year-end list not too long ago, and it's a book called The Box, and The Box is basically about containerized shipping. And so containerized shipping really took hold in the 70s. So the world that we're experiencing right now, and I know you guys are in like hardcore sciences, the world that I guess Mike and I are in, like we grew up in the late 90s, 2000s, where like you can write software and then it can become Facebook. So you can imagine like that's what containerized shipping was in the 70s. Before that, it was just like guys, and mostly guys, just like carrying stuff from a truck and loading it onto a ship. And containerized shipping was basically like that has a couple of barcodes, that's going to go to China and it's going to arrive on Thursday. And that really revolutionized how stuff is moving across the world. And a lot of globalization isn't really, you know, us talking in digitally like this. It's the fact that we can get an iPhone in 4 days time. And so I think in India, when you're growing up and you finish college in the 70s, you're like, well, what do I do? You got to get into the hottest field, and that shipping is the hottest field, is where you can see the world, is where you can get paid a lot of money, meet a lot of people from a lot of different cultures. And so that was a natural path for him to go down. His father passed away when he was 3 or 4 years old. And so he ended up having to support his mom. And I think he thought, okay, I got to finish school. I got to go make a lot of money. I got to make sure she's okay. And so that was like almost like, just like I'm thinking like computer science is what I need to go down. I don't really care about anything else because this is where the opportunity is. I think that's how he thought about it. But it's definitely a lonely life to live on a boat for most of your life. Your assignment basically meant that you would go on either 1 or 2 assignments a year, and or sales a year, and that meant you were away from family for 8 or 9 months out of the year. So ultimately, I think he retired after my sister was born. She's 6 years younger than I am, because you can't really be away from your family for so long and still expect to make a connection with, you know, with everybody.
How did that?
But I think overall he loved it. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that time apart specifically affect you?
I think maybe in some ways, I think I maybe learned a lot more soft skills, you know, just being around my mom and my sister more, and a lot more women in my family. And I remember spending a lot more time with my grandparents, for instance, staying at their house in their small village, as opposed to our house in Madras. I think it kind of brought us closer together as a bigger family than I think maybe if he had been there, then it would have just been the 4 of us going on trips and doing things on our own. So I remember just kind of growing up with this big family in this big house, and seeing all the cousins and seeing everybody, and kind of being the, you know, in a weird way, like a favorite of the family and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I remember all those stories. But on the other side, yeah, I didn't really have the dad to show me all the time. He was somebody that I respected and looked up to, but you know, I can't turn to him for homework advice all the time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that was actually done by my mom. So yeah, the good and bad, maybe bad is not the right word, but like, yeah, pros and cons to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you
On his
eventually,
last,
yeah, you could
I was
go.
going to say, on his last assignment, my sister was 2 years old. And so on his last assignment as a sailor, he said, okay, I got to stop doing this. I need something more like a desk job, or a job where I'm not, you know, risking my life and doing all this crazy stuff. And on his last assignment, he decided, for whatever reason, to take me and my mom along as well. And because my sister was only 2 years old, you know, because of vaccinations, and you don't want a small child on a big kind of cargo boat, we left my sister behind with family, and the 3 of us just sailed around halfway around the world for about 8 or 9 months. So shortly before I moved to the US, his last assignment and my kind of, I jokingly say, a gap year, where I didn't actually go to 4th grade, I actually got homeschooled and I lived on a ship with him.
That's crazy.
So
yeah,
brought the 2 sides together.
So you eventually moved to the United States after that. I mean, that must have been pretty tough and a giant change in scenery. Like,
yeah, I definitely was. All sorts of things were very hard, even though we'd kind of been relatively, I guess, upper middle class in India, like relatively okay and well off compared to obviously the average person. There were a lot of like cultural shocks. There's like economic stresses. How do you pay for all this stuff? There's a lot of like, how do you make friends? I came in at I guess age 11, so like 5th grade, 6th grade. So 5th grade was really hard. Like I'd missed all of elementary school. Like I didn't know team sports. I didn't play soccer because that's a team sport. I didn't do things like that. So there was a lot of growing up that I still had to do. But there were some things that were easy too. You know, I'd gone to a private school in India, and I'd learned English. So I didn't have to learn English. I actually knew what that was like. Because of the way the school system in India is set up, I was actually I'd started school a year or two ahead of everyone else. And when I moved here, so I not only did I start a year ahead, but I kind of, by nature of having skipped half a school year because I was on a ship, and because I was already a year ahead, I was technically 2 years ahead by the time I got here. So like my math and my science were far ahead of everybody else. So in some sense, like I didn't really struggle in school, or I didn't fall behind, and I think that would have made things even harder, right? Had I had to like, that was it, if I was like 2 classes behind anyone else, or even 2 classes behind language arts, or any one of these subjects, I think that would have made it even harder for me to feel like I fit in, to feel like, oh, how am I ever going to catch up? I'm already 13 years old. What am I going to do here? And I think that probably is some of it.
Do the societal barriers of you being an immigrant still exist today? Do you still feel a lot of those struggles?
Uh, I definitely felt a lot of that uh, for most of the first. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think now how many years we've been here. I'm trying to think how many years citizens, but like, so we've now been here for um, I guess 29 years, and yeah, I guess 29. Yeah, let's just say 29. So I guess for the first 10 of those years, I it was really hard because we were by ourselves, kind of. We didn't have a lot of friends. It was hard to make friends. Um, the idea of like, who are you as an immigrant? I have this concept like we're all trying to belong, whether you're an immigrant or not. We all want to belong, right? Even if you think about a lot of the stuff that's going on in the U.S. right now with like two warring parties, and like or even now with COVID, like people are like stay at home, and then there's a bunch of people that just they don't want to stay at home. People just want something to belong to. They want something to. They want a community, and so I think the hardest thing about being an immigrant is uh, you don't know where you belong because you uprooted, not just you as a kid, but also your parents and your siblings as well. And so, do you belong in your old country, or do you belong in the new? Or do you belong to this kind of third group, which is kind of expats, or immigrants, or people like you who are first generation? I don't know. So where do you really belong? And I think a lot of the struggles of exactly what you're saying, was it hard? Is it hard to fit in? Did you feel like you fit in? What are the things you felt? I think all of it can be traced back to that concept. You know, should I have been playing soccer all along? I didn't even grow up playing soccer. Um, should I be ahead on these subjects but not others? Like, how does that work? Should I have more friends at this point? How do friends work? Like, which side of this world do you really belong in? And I think that took a long time to kind of get used to and fit into. And I would say that probably didn't go away until I got to New York. And New York City is one of these places that I didn't even know I wanted to move into until 3 months before I finally moved out there when I was 21. And New York has a way of just saying like everyone belongs. You can be anybody you want to be, right? You can have a beard, you can have a turban, you can like you can like whoever you want, whatever you are into. You can kind of belong. You can wear sandals on the street. Who cares? It's winter. You can do anything you want, and I think that's the first place in the world where I felt like you're okay here. And so a couple of years into living in New York, all of this idea of like me being an immigrant, me being different, just totally disappeared.
Yeah. You started Foursquare in New York as well. Is this part of the reason why you didn't choose to move it to Silicon Valley, where a lot of the other big businesses at the time were starting?
Um, I don't even think we thought about location at the time. So so when I was in school, I worked a lot of odd jobs. So I actually worked at Lucent Technologies for a couple of years, working on like software that went on networking switches. So like embedded systems programming. Then I worked at Sun Microsystems for a couple of years, working on their developer lab. Basically, anytime you write code on a Sun system, somebody has to write the code that you write on, right? The platforms, all this stuff. So there was a developer lab where basically, if you had any issues, you would pass it to them. I would test run the code. I would recreate your kind of working environment, and I would tell you what you're doing wrong, and maybe if it's our fault, what we can fix. So I'd worked all these odd jobs, and actually one of the other crazy jobs that I worked is I just helped 3 friends in New York with their music startup. And so this was 2001. It was before 9/11 and it happened, and they were out there pitching this idea of music on mobile phones, which these days sounds like any phone can play it. Not a big deal, guys. But back then, my God, this is before most of you were probably even born. But back then, the phones all played different file formats. All the phones, not all phones could even play music. And even if they could, they couldn't play the whole song. So the hack that these guys came up with was, let's just, instead of full songs and an iTunes music store, we'll just make a ringtone music store. So I helped them with that company, with that product. And then 9/11 happened in New York. They were based in New York. They weren't able to raise money. They weren't able to get all the licensing done with all the music companies. Calling up AT&T to do the deals was really hard. So they sold to Sony. And I made it to Sony. And I know this is a long story, but it's going to make a little sense. So I got to Sony. I was working at this crude startup. It didn't work out. I was the first employee at the startup. And I moved to New York because I loved them so much. And we built a really great team within Sony. But I was itching inside Sony the whole time. So it wasn't really about Silicon Valley or New York. I was itching inside because I saw people in Silicon Valley, and I saw people in New York in the tech space working on stuff. And I was kind of working on it, but no one knew I was working on it. I was kind of working on it, but I didn't have equity. I was kind of working on it, but I didn't call the shots. And so I decided, okay, there's got to be other ideas. Phones are going to be getting better and better. Apple's probably going to come out with a phone. So I got to go do something there. And I actually went to start a local search on mobile product called Socialite with 2 other guys in New York. And that didn't work out either. So now 2 in a row that didn't kind of work out. And kind of out of the ashes of that one, my friend Dennis and I started Foursquare. We were actually sitting in the same shared office space before co-working was a thing. And we just started talking about ideas. We were like, I'm really frustrated. This didn't work out. This is the hardest Thursday. I don't understand. We've now spent 3 months. Nothing is working out. And we just kind of trade and like IM back and forth and like trade prototypes and trade code and just trade ideas. And so that's where Foursquare came out of. So to us, it wasn't really about, Silicon Valley. That's where all the magic is. It wasn't really about oh my God, we're going to make a lot of money and do all this stuff. But it was rather, wait, mobile phones are going to be even more of a thing. They're going to be in everyone's pockets, but they still aren't letting us see the world the way we want to see it. There's got to be something there. And so it was really about that, ultimately about just figuring that out. And so, yeah, long story short, a bunch of these small things just put together ended up in this thing. And it was more about the passion of wanting to figure that out, as opposed to like, should we go to Silicon Valley? Are we are we going to be more successful there? Like those weren't really even questions. And actually, luckily enough, Foursquare is a thing that's like, it's a search product. So if you pull up any Google map right now, like if you're in the middle of nowhere, even if you're in a small town in Silicon Valley, like there's not a lot that you can pull up. It's just a bunch of homes, just suburbs, right? And you're going to get like one coffee shop and it's probably a Starbucks. Not that interesting. So either by coincidence or by mere fact that we were living in New York, led to a lot of these ideas around, wait, anytime you pull up a map in New York, there's always stuff around you, but you don't really see it. So how do we make that even more visible? How do you actually know about the coffee shop that your friend knows about, let's say that Mike knows about, that I didn't know about. So that's really what it was about, unlocking that by your phone. And New York is a much better place to do that, any big city than Silicon Valley.
So you had to quit your job at Sony in order to take on like the beginning of Foursquare. I know you wanted to do it. You always wanted to start a business. How did you deal with the backlash from other people? How did like people like your family, the people who wanted you to go and get your master's degree, how did they feel about that?
It's funny because actually after I finished the master's in computer science, I moved to New York. I was 21, and I wanted to go back to school, and I thought, okay, so I know software now. That's cool, and I have a master's, so I can kind of wave at it when it's interesting, and it gets me access to stuff. But there's got to be something else. Like maybe I was really into bioengineering, so I actually applied to a few bioengineering, two actually, NYU and Columbia, and I got in, but I deferred it because I was working at Sony at the time. And so I kept doing, I think I wanted to do a lot of different things. I wanted to go into bioengineering. I wanted to go try to start a company. I wanted to go work with these guys at Sony and make it a big thing. It's almost like I didn't know what I wanted. But there was one thing that kept pulling at me. And I realized I'm only 24 years old. It's now or never. And the thing that I realized was, I think I could always go back to school. I think I could always work at a big company like Sony. But now might be the only time where I can just quit my job. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. I'm only 24 years old. I don't have a lot of bills. My rent is very cheap, relatively speaking. I had roommates at the time, right? I don't have my own house. And so as scary as it was, I realized that that's probably the least risky time almost to quit your job. It's kind of counterintuitive. Because right now I don't have a job, and I know I'm in a different place now, but like right now it's a difficult time to quit a job because I have a kid, I have a family. I have to figure out, health insurance is very expensive. We got to figure out all these bills and expenses. At 24, I didn't have any of that stuff. So in a way, it was easy to make the decision. And I think everybody understood. I still remember talking to my mom and I explained this to her. And by the way, at the time, because I wanted to cut all the expenses, I actually went about almost 2 years without health insurance because I realized it's a risk. I'll just pay out of pocket. I'm still young. I'll try to stay healthy. I'm not flying. I'm not doing anything crazy. I don't have a car. So I really kept everything low and I didn't even have health insurance. So I told my mom that I was going to quit my job and she kind of sighed and there was a pause and then she said, you know, that's okay. This will be like living in college. You spend a couple of $100s a month when you're in college. This is kind of like that. You're only 3 years away from college, right? Whereas now, if I go tell her any crazy decision like that, she might just be like, okay, but you have a kid. You can't do these things. So in a way, I think nobody freaked out. Even my coworkers were like, I think they understood. And I think it was great to get a vote of confidence from my mom. This is like being in college, you know, just have peanut butter jelly sandwiches and, you know, don't go out with your friends. Not that hard.
You started it with your friend Dennis. How did you know that Dennis was the person that you wanted to co-found Foursquare with?
So when in 2007, when I quit Sony, we ended up in a co-working space actually that this company Socialite was in, which I was working on, and Dennis was working at another company called Area Code, making kind of big urban games. So really like digital games on top of the real world. And so we were both working at two different startups, and it was a co-working space that was sublet to us by another startup, like another mobile startup called Cargo. And so that's where we met. And so, like I said, the whole time we're working on our stuff, we just get really frustrated. Like there's a lot more out there that is just not getting done. And we had the desire and kind of this kind of like itch, kind of, we can't sit still kind of itch. And I think we both saw that in each other. And over the year or two that we were in that space, a little over a year, I guess, we'd made enough friends with our mutual coworkers and, you know, founders of these companies. And I think the mutual friends also were kind of a little bit of a nudge. Like you guys are both kind of a little antsy. You want to do something. You can't sit still. You have similar ideas in this space. You have complementary skill sets in terms of who can build what and kind of take over and get it to a state that's, you know, something you can release. And you're both good guys, so you should just go do it. And I think there was a little bit of not only us getting along and just having that desire and that itch, but also some of our friends saying like, we see that in you, we see something common, so just go after it. And I think the third thing is we just wanted to do something there. After I quit my job at Sony, I told my bosses at Sony in January 2007, late January 2007, Steve Jobs announced the iPhone. In June 2007, the iPhone was in everybody's hands. So we both kind of quit our jobs at exactly the right time. I quit Sony, I think in May 2007. I think Dennis quit Google in, I think May, around the same time, April, May 2007. And then iPhone came out in June, and then we're holding it in our hands and we're saying, we got to build for this. How do we do it? And it was a year later that iPhone SDK had actually come out. So I think it was June of the following year, WWDC the following year, when you could crudely program the first year, but it wasn't until the second year that you knew there was going to be an app store, that you could get access to all the deeper SDKs and low-level stuff that you needed. And so it was an easy decision. Like we're at the beginning of something that's just so big that we gotta start here. Let's go.
What obstacles did you two face this time around? Because you said you had two failed businesses before, and what helped you specifically this time overcome them?
Um, well, I would say in one amazing sense, I think we both got very lucky, right? And most businesses don't just get lucky. You don't just get like, and luck is outside of other things like what we did or what we built or timing. You know? So there's just like this element, this magic kind of dust that's like luck. So we definitely got a lot of kind of the winds of luck actually in our favor. But outside of that, I would say we were just very focused. There's just something there in local and local search. At the time, MapQuest existed. Google Maps existed. The Google Maps had been around since 2005, I think. And a handful of small startups were trying to figure it out. So it's kind of like, it was either MapQuest or Google Maps, or that's it. There was just nobody else. And there was a lot of opportunity because just like Google had helped you, Google search, the traditional search, had helped you kind of navigate, you know, needle in a haystack. You could just type in a keyword and PageRank gives it to you. Besides, you know, the early versions of Google Maps, no one was doing that in the real world. So again, like the coffee shop thing, what's the coffee shop running? Or you're walking by something and you're like, this temple is really cool. We're like, what's the story behind this temple? Can I get like the Wikipedia kind of overlaid on top of the temple so I can read, the history behind it? Nobody was really doing that. And so we knew that just like Google had figured out online search, whoever figures out kind of this layer on top of the real world or like real world search stands to A, be a big company, B, solve even more bigger and better problems, and C, make a lot of money, either for the small businesses, ourselves, whatever it might be. You just knew that there was something there. So I would say the fact that we were really focused on it, I think helped us. And then the third is the thing I was just saying. There is this device that came out called the iPhone. And the iPhone is this thing that now, like, a billion people have, and Android even, 2 or 3 billion people now. I forget the number, 2.5 billion, I guess. And never before, until the computer had come out, did a device get into so many hands so quickly, right? There are all these charts that you can see, like, how many people had the Walkman and how quickly did the Walkman adoption grow? How quickly did the iPod grow? How quickly did the television grow? How quickly did people have cars? And how many people in the world had even cars? Like iPhone, basically, the smartphone, I should say, not even iPhone, had basically kind of eclipsed all those curves. And more people had them sooner and in a shorter timeline than all these other devices. And so it's almost like probably being at the beginning of the computer revolution or the beginning of the internet. So the beginning of computers, whatever, let's call these beginning computer stuff, beginning of the internet, early 90s, like 1994 internet, where you're like, there is no place to shop online. There's no marketplace. So Amazon gets going. So that's where we found ourselves. So we could almost pick any space, and I think it could have been something good. So yeah, so to answer your question, like there were a lot of things that I think we did right or didn't do right or didn't even know we might have done right. But I think luck definitely had a lot to do with it. The fact that we were just so focused on a space that clearly is going to be massive had something to do with it. And then third, I mean, like the iPhone is just such a magical thing where more people in the world now have it in their hands than any other device. And any other device since then, by the way, like PlayStation isn't there, Xbox isn't there, Oculus isn't there, right? Oculus could still be a great platform, but not everyone has it. It's just going to be too hard to get AR or VR adoption at that level. But iPhone had that.
Yeah.
That definitely helped us.
You eventually left the company though in 2012, and that was a big deal. Obviously, what was your reasoning for eventually leaving?
I think it was a bunch of different things. I think one, I built a lot of stuff inside Foursquare, including spearheading Foursquare platform, which is basically, the Foursquare Places database and Foursquare as an SDK and platform that other people can build on top of. So even today, if you launch a lot of apps like the Ubers of the world, it'll actually autocomplete Foursquare Places. So you actually want to get to a restaurant, that has to come from somewhere. So those have been kind of like some of my dreams to build, and I built those things. And I think some of it also was just kind of, there's a lot of stuff I could do. Other people are doing it. I think I should go do other stuff, right? There's only so many things that I think I could have my hand in that other people weren't also working on. And I think the third thing was just me just wanting to take a break and just try other ideas. I think just like before Foursquare, I tried a few different things and some didn't work out and some did work out. I think I still have that itch to A, either invest in some stuff and help other people, or B, just try ideas of my own, and just kind of go back to the roots of just starting from the ground floor, talking to users, to customers, figuring out my own niche and kind of scratching that own itch. So it's a combination of things, I would say.
Do you ever regret anything?
There are pros and cons. I think, I've done a lot of really great stuff and built a lot of different ideas, and a lot of them haven't worked out since leaving. But also, it would be fun to have been part of something that I still think about this, like, be a part of something that's like 10 or 20 years long, right? My wife actually started a business actually in 2009 as well, the same year we started Foursquare, and she just shut it down in November of last year. So she did a enormous 10-year run. She just she basically was there for the life of the company, essentially. So there's something about that, because this is something you create. You want to be a part of that story the whole time, but that's not always how it plays out. So I don't know how to answer that question. I think there's like, not everybody stays the whole time. Some people, like the Jeff Bezos of the world, stay the whole time. So I don't know. The stories can play out differently. Part of the reason I say it that way is I think it was um, this author and professor Jeffrey West. I think he said something along the lines of like companies are almost like people. Like companies are, the early days of a startup, they're like babies. You have to be there for them all the time. Like, you can't turn out the lights. They're going to get scared of the dark. Like there's all this stuff you have to do. Then there are these teenage years where you're not sure what's going on. Then companies reach maturity, companies reach old age. Some companies live to be very long lives. And then eventually they all die. They're like us in a certain sense. So like not to get too philosophical, but like, yeah, there's some parts where I feel like, yeah, that's my baby in a way. That's the child. I wish it was there. Then other parts, you start thinking, I have all these other ideas and all these other children and all these other things that I'm involved in. So there's no one kind of right answer.
You eventually ended up working at the startup studio Expa, and at your time there, you worked on projects like Current and Kit, and a lot of them are really successful. When you did that, did you ever develop a formula for how to develop a business, and like how did your time at Foursquare help you do this?
Um, I think we tried to come up, it's not really a formula, but I think we tried to come up with kind of best practices and perhaps ways of learning about opportunities that we were interested in and making sure to put the right team behind those ideas. And then as quickly as possible, trying to get to actual users and customers and seeing if there's a there there, right? So in every case where stuff we tried at Expa succeeded, I think they've been kind of like these nuggets of ideas in our heads. We just kind of talk about them at lunch and during the workday, and then we'd say, okay, that's really great. We have to do something in, I don't know, delivery of blah, and that thing can't become a thing until we actually go convince a bunch of other people to come join and build it with us. So in a weird way, the early days of a startup, that's some of the hard stuff, right? In the early days of a startup, you don't really have anything. You may not even have written the first line of code yet. You may not even have identified who the customer is, but you definitely have to go recruit a bunch of people, engineers, designers. So in almost every case, we've gotten it right and we have built a successful idea at Expa. I would say it started with the team. We've kind of essentially pitched the right idea or have been pitched the right idea by a team. And we ended up working on it at the right time. And we just stayed focused in a space and focused on who the eventual user or customer is, and just kind of rinse and repeat. Just keep going and keep solving the thing for them. And I think when you look back on it, it ends up becoming a success. But it's always started with us having some inkling of like a space that we really like and we're interested in, and making sure to put the right team together at that right time, because nothing else really matters.
And the last question I have before I'm going to open it up to the audience is,
yeah.
Where do you see yourself next? I know you mentioned about how it would be nice to see something grow maybe over a 10-year run, but you just left Expa and now you're in between jobs. So are you still looking to start new things and hop around there? Or are you looking to settle down and find something for the long run?
So I kind of left at an interesting time. So I left, we've been reading about COVID. A couple of weeks after, I think I really read more things about it in China in late January. I announced that I was leaving. And then by mid-February, my wife and I were just kind of thinking, obviously like everybody else, like this is really going to be a thing that's going to be very disruptive. And at the time we didn't know how disruptive, and now we know, right? And I think so if anything, we both said we were going to leave our jobs. We just had a kid about a year ago. And I think in 2020, it was going to be our year of just reading and helping our friends and spending time with our child and spending time with family, and just not really taking a break, but I've equated to just being a sponge and just reading and absorbing and just like taking in ideas from all different angles. And I think COVID has put a little bit of a break to that, or kind of like I don't even know what, it's kind of hit it from the side. And so now we're like, well, now that coronavirus is going on and we can't really be around people in the same way for quite some time. And, we can't just put a team together and start kind of coding away at something in person. We can't build anything, and like building is different now. So we think, okay, how do we want to spend our time? So we're still trying to figure it out. I think it's going to be, if we can't spend time with family and be close to everyone, it's just going to be the three of us spending a lot more time together. It's just going to be us. We can still be a sponge. So instead of thinking about a new idea to build, how can we help those close to us, right? Can we donate money in certain areas? Can we, what is there to build to help with COVID, to help people navigate this stuff? So I think for the last couple of weeks, I've just been talking to a couple of friends about, just resources and free kind of ideas we can build, not companies, not for-profit companies uh, or things we're going to sell or anything like that, but just how do we bring people together? How can we help them when they most need us? What are things we can do? So that's what I've been thinking a little bit more about.
That's
yeah.
awesome to hear.
Yeah.
I'm going to open it up to the audience. So if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand on the Zoom call and we'll on you. Carmen Z.
Hi. So I have a question. So what were some like personal sacrifices, like hobbies and like parties that you missed to like focus on what you're passionate about? Like some personal sacrifices you made.
I would say the biggest, I didn't think about it as personal sacrifice because it's one of these things like, if I went back in time and changed that thing, I wouldn't be who I am. I still really do believe that. There's only kind of, there's a certain set of paths that got me where I am. But if I were to think about a personal sacrifice, I think it was probably a lot of college. So I finished a master's and bachelor's, which is intended for a 6-year run. I finished it all in 4 years, or like 4 years and 1 month or something like that, 4 years and 2 weeks. I don't know how the thing worked out. And so that meant that I was that meant that I was going to school in the fall, winter, I guess fall, spring, and summer sessions. So there were 3 kind of semesters, and all 3 semesters I was going to school. So that meant like very few friends. I think I probably had like 5 friends in college, 3 of whom I still keep in touch with. I don't think I went to a single party in college, actually. Maybe when I wasn't in school, I was either going to work at night or going to work during the day. So like grad school, basically the classes were at night, so I'd go to work during the day. And undergrad is flipped, classes during the day, working at night. So that's why I worked at Lucent, I worked at Sun, I worked in the college computer lab. There was another company near Burlington, I guess, near Boston and near Cambridge. So I wrote some software for them. I helped my friends who are in New York with their company. And so I worked 4 jobs over 4 years as well. And so, yeah, so sacrifice-wise, yeah, no social life, didn't drink, didn't go to any parties, didn't do anything else. Just drove my car, went to the campus library, or went to work. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Not that I recommend it, by the way. I'm just saying that's what I did. I'm not trying to tell you guys to do it.
Max Berger, you have a question?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for calling on me. So being a location-based services with Foursquare, I'm sure there was a lot of government regulation when you were first starting it. So like as a startup with limited resources, how did you manage to deal with this government regulation efficiently?
What do you mean by government regulation in terms of how we can use that data?
Yeah, in terms of how you can use data, since I know that there's so much laws and regulations, especially around the collection of data and the usage of that kind of data.
I think there's more of that now than there used to be. And also in the early days, we were not using the data for any purpose except to answer a search query for you. So we weren't aggregating the data. We weren't kind of trying to infer trends and kind of insights from the data. We weren't trying to anonymize it and try to figure out, how are people moving around? How can this help hedge funds? Like, it wasn't doing any of that kind of stuff. In the early days, the whole goal was you would tell us where you were. So that was a lat long and like altitude or whatever. And so we'd take that and then we'd say, okay, here are some data points around you, and then just return results. That's it. We didn't do anything else with your phone number, email, didn't sell your data, didn't do any of that stuff. And so I think the biggest challenges were not government regulations, but rather, and again, this is 2009, right? This is 2008, 2009. The biggest thing was explaining to people that it was okay to share your location because you're sharing it knowingly and you're sharing it with a select group of friends that you've actually chosen to share it with. And it sounds crazy to say that now, but back then, 08, 09, 2010, everyone was really freaked out. What if somebody else sees where I am? Why would I want to share my location? Why would my friends even want to know where I am? Why do I need to give the location in order to get the search results? Like all of these questions, almost on a daily basis, on stage, in interviews, we had to explain ourselves. But explain why would people do this? Why it's an okay thing? You're only sharing it with your friends. But nowadays, you see people are just kind of tagging left and right on Instagram. Right? You go live, you see the snap map. You use Zenly. We see where everybody is, and it's like just a normal thing to do now.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say 10 years ago, more than governments or companies or anyone else freaking out about it, it was the individual, the user that we were actually going after, or journalists who freak out, I guess, in some cases rightly about this stuff, or just, just didn't understand why you would do this. Why would you even want to see where the friends are on a map?
Mm-hmm.
And, what are the benefits of that? What in the downside? What happens to the bad cases? What happens to bad actors who could see that? And so a lot of concern was just around that. Whereas these days, 10 years later, no one even bats an eye when, tagging themselves and posting a photo of themselves on a beach somewhere and tagging in the beach in real time, right? In Instagram stories. When you pull up stories right now, you're exactly at the beach that you're actually shooting from, and no one even thinks twice about it. So I would say the biggest thing, rightly, we predicted correctly that not that people wouldn't care, but they would do it knowingly and they would do it in ways that made sense for them, right? That's what we were trying to prove, and that's exactly what people are doing now.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Next, we have Janae. Is she still here?
Oh, I'm on mute. Sorry. What would you say, in your opinion, aside from personal sacrifice, is the most important factor to consider when you want to start a new business or develop a new software?
Just the sacrifice to start a new thing?
What's that?
I want to understand. I want to understand the question. So, what's the biggest? What?
Oh, I said, like, aside from personal sacrifice, what is the most important factor to consider when you want to start a new business or start a new software or something?
Okay. Sure. I would say, well, I've now been with my wife for 5 years, and so she's been running her business for 10 years, and so she also started the company. She founded it, sole founder, sole CEO. So instead of just speaking from my experience, I'll speak from hers, and also the experience of all the other CEOs and other founders that I've worked with over the years, either on our ideas or me helping them with their ideas. And I would say the biggest thing that I've learned, and the biggest thing that people don't realize, and the hardest thing, is just how long it takes. It's everything seems like an overnight success, and I'm sure there have been a few really super fast successes, right? Instagram, I remember I was one of the early beta users in August or like July or August of 2010. And I think by, I don't know, July or August of 2012, they sold to Facebook. So 2 years they sold. That's not how it works. Those instances are just so rare, but those are the instances that we all read about, and like the tech press and the journalists love to write about. The New York Times writes about, these two guys sold it for $1 billion. Take a look at it. But in reality, like, my wife has been working at it for 10 years. And the stuff that she goes through are kind of the same stuff that I go through in the software world, or that Mike goes through, which is, okay, how do I make payroll? Okay, COVID hit. I mean, luckily she closed her business, COVID. But right now she'd have to be thinking how to pay the employees. What is she going to do? How are they going to pay for health insurance? So all businesses, whether it's software or some of the ideas you may have, or whether my wife runs an ice cream company, or she used to, whether it's ice cream or a local business, it's all the same. It takes a long time, and you only know so much. Even if you're really good, you make mistakes, which seem kind of obvious in hindsight. And yeah, it just is a long, hard struggle, and a lot of ups and downs. And that's not unique to any one type of company. That's universal across anyone trying to start anything.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, you still there?
Next question is from Aaron Lewis.
Hey Naveen. Quick intro into myself. I'm also part of the Knowledge Society, like Anisha and some other people on the call. And I'm actually like kind of focusing on human longevity.
Can you guys hear? Hey.
Yeah. So I guess my question is sort of a meta question. It's one that's asked a lot on like podcasts and interviews and sort of things. It's what is an important truth that you believe in that other people around you disagree with?
I've heard a variation of this question. I should have been more prepared with an answer here. Um, what do I believe in that other people disagree with? Uh, I'm not sure how many people disagree with this. Maybe you guys don't in this group, and maybe that's why you are who you are with TKS. But I would say, for most of my life, and this may have something to do with me being an immigrant, may have something to do with me and my parents and the way they grew up. Um, it may have something to do with just society. But like one of the things I remember, and more than a few people have actually repeated this, and I've come to now believe it over the last 10 or 15 years, although I have to keep reminding myself, everything around us has been invented by us. We made up all of these constructs, right? Whether that's something physical, um, like the light bulb and the design and shape of this thing, or some legal construct or some abstract thing where we're like, this is law, this is the way law works, and this is the way we're supposed to kind of interact with each other. We made all that stuff up. So if anyone tells you something, it's not necessarily like you need to like you need to be a rebel and like disagree with everybody, but like everyone else made the thing up. And so I think especially if you're in math or if you're an entrepreneur, if you're any of these areas where you want to create, you have to keep thinking of that. And I think too often we just forget about that. Right? I think especially maybe as we get older, or maybe even our parents' generation, maybe they just believe things are the way they are because they are the way they are. That's just how they've always known it. But I think I've come to realize like there's a certain way you can think about the world, which is that you know we're we invented everything we see around us, which means we can question everything we can see around us. Which means that if something is the way it is, maybe it's not the best that implementation of the thing that it could be, right? It is still up for interpretation and improvement. Um, and this is why I was saying like other people say similar things as well. Like Elon Musk probably calls it like going back to first principles. I think Steve Jobs back in the day used to say like, like people are driven by dogma, but you got to realize that they're just doing, they're like lemmings, they're just doing the thing that everyone else told them to do. So there are many variations of it, but I think that's one of the most important things I like to think about as well, because I don't know, I think it just kind of really colors both what you can create, it colors how you interact with people, it colors how you may even talk with people, even if you disagree with them, you know and I think it colors how, I don't know, the respect we have for each other and the world around us. There's a lot of things that I think it touches upon.
Do you think in any form, because do you think that in any form there is some wisdom in crowds? Because actually, like, I kind of believe the converse from like the environment, I guess, that TKS puts us in. It's like there's a lot of people who think that they can like disrupt an industry or disrupt a different sector, but in reality, like I like maybe I'm thinking the wrong way, like, or making my assumptions that most people think are kind of like thinking like disruptors. But it's like there's some people, the way things have been is because that's like the collective intelligence of everyone that's come before us. So it's like the institutions that we have today, like healthcare and stuff like that. It's like unless you there's a reason why it's been like that, and there's a reason why all the smart people generation before us have created these institutions. Do you still like reconcile that there is some sort of wisdom there?
I think I think there is some wisdom in the crowd. Maybe there's wisdom in just stuff that we've already built. So I actually think a lot about, especially since the last election, especially now, especially this year, I always think a lot about like how wise the founding fathers in the US really were. And I'm sure every country has their set of founding fathers and mothers that were equally wise. But especially here in the US, they just said, federal government can do these things. But if not, the state governments in a decentralized way will take over. No one thing will fall apart. And so we see some of that stuff playing out now. The governors are kind of stepping up where federal government isn't. So in some cases, yeah, I mean, maybe what's already been written on the stone tablets is the right way to do it. And obviously it's been written by incredibly smart people from way back in the day. And now it's, more than 200 years later, it's still kind of carrying us. But I think in other cases, one way I think about it is like those new improvements are harder to come by. Like it's harder to be a rebel now because a lot of stuff has been taught about, right? It's harder to innovate now because a lot of stuff has been taught about. Like, in the early days of making a motorcycle, you might say like, oh, let's move this back here because that changes the weight distribution. But now, 100 years, 120 years of making motorcycles, that stuff has been figured out. The computer figures it out for us now. The computer rebalances all this stuff. And so if anything, those innovations are harder to come by, which means that it's probably even more important to kind of think of yourself in a much more exceptional way or to think slightly differently than the crowds, right? And maybe those insights now come not just from like some crazy engineering hack where you just outthink everybody and like, somehow you think of the thing the computer doesn't think about, but maybe it's about blending different, and this is something I personally believe in and try to bring to my work. It's like maybe it's about blending different disciplines. It's not just like the math of how to distribute weight and all the stuff and all the pieces on a motorcycle, but it's like, oh man, I saw this one color, blah, blah, blah. This leather would be really nice and whatever. This shape would be really nice. And that shape was inspired by some piece of art that I saw. And so I'm going to make the motorcycle in that shape, right? I don't know. I'm making up a story here, but like, if we didn't have the people that didn't think like everyone else, how would we improve on that design? And so I do think while there's wisdom in the crowds and there's like a lot of wisdom and experience in the way things are, I think certain innovations and improvements and like beautiful things can't exist now unless we start thinking differently than the crowd. Unless, to your point, like you think differently and you believe in something that very few people do or nobody else does.
Awesome. Thank you for that. One last question really quickly from Max. Go for it.
Yes, thanks so much. I did have a question. So when Foursquare was seeking funding in 2009, like how did you know that that was the right time to actually start seeking funding, like from venture capital?
Well, neither of us had raised money at that time. The startup that Dennis was working for at the time, I don't remember if they even tried to raise money because they were kind of a blend of an agency and they were bringing in money as an agency from, I don't know, like Pepsi, let's say, was paying them a ton of money and they were using that money to go write their own code. And in my case, it was all like angel money. So I hadn't actually raised the money. My partner in that thing was trying to do it. And I saw, 5 years before that, the guys in the startup pre-Sony also struggled to raise money. So we'd never really known what that was and like how they gone through that process. But I think after we launched it, it took off. Like there was a certain excitement and interest in it. And a couple of VCs actually wrote into us. And we'd also been friends with a few VCs around the time we were launching it and before the time we were launching it. And I think it was one of these things like, this thing is going to take off. We need to hire other people to help us. So how do you hire other people? Right? We were kind of, I was teaching class at Cooper Union. I was doing consulting work on the side to pay my bills so I could work on this. But we needed money to pay other people. We needed money for the servers, which was coming out of my pocket. Like we needed money to, get an office space to put everybody. So in a way, like it was an inevitable thing. Like we needed to do that in order to actually get to the next stage. And if it hadn't taken off, like if it hadn't had the usage that it did and the kind of interest it did, we may have not raised because we'd had a few thousand users. We would have said, okay, let's try to figure this out some other way. Like, this is going to cost us $10,000 a month to run. Let's try to take on either more consulting gigs or let's try to like almost like go the, I don't know if this is the right word, like the agency route. Let's just go bring Pepsi on as a consultant. We'll build them something custom and then we'll use that money to run this thing. You know what I mean? Like had it not taken off as fast as it did, I think we would have tried to explore other opportunities. But in that case, not only did VCs come in knocking, but also it was a natural place to go because we needed a lot of money and we knew we had something interesting on our hands.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Naveen, for coming and talking with us today. I know everyone really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thank you. Next time, maybe next year, I guess we'll meet in person, but
Yeah.
this is cool to do it virtually.